Diccon Bewes, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for asking me.
Mr. Bewes, it seems like public radio is more or less under attack in many countries. Certainly international shortwave services have suffered quite a bit. And now it seems that Swiss public radio is under some kind of attack. And Switzerland has a very interesting democratic system. Tell me, first of all, how that works that puts Swiss radio into this kind of predicament.
It's called direct democracy, and it means that every Swiss citizen has a vote on almost any issue. And it takes two forms. One form is that if the government makes a decision or Parliament passes legislation, then people can call a referendum to counter that, to have a vote on that. And the other form is that if they want the constitution to change, they can collect signatures and force a referendum on any issue. Now, what's happened here is that the government have proposed that the financing of public radio and public television carries on as before, and that's with a license fee, just like in Britain, so that every household pays a fixed license fee. And that money goes towards the financing of public radio and television. Now, a committee of people, mainly right-wingers, disagree with that, and so they have forced a referendum to call for the abolition of the license fee and for all public radio and television to be financed by adverts or by subscription, or for it to just disappear. And so that's the situation Switzerland is facing. It is a vote that is abnormal in Switzerland in that it's dealing with something very fundamental to Swiss society, but voting every 4 months is perfectly normal in Switzerland.
Tell me about the extent and the purpose of Swiss public radio. I mean, for example, in Canada, we have 2 official languages and we broadcast in 2 languages, and that is a mandate. And we also have services for Aboriginal languages and so on and so forth. What is Swiss radio like?
Well, Switzerland has 4 national languages. Obviously, German is the main one with about 65% of the population, but there's also French and Italian and a unique language called Romansh, which is spoken just in 1 canton and is unique to Switzerland. And so public radio and television are transmitted in all 4 languages, which is quite an undertaking for a country of only 8 million people. And so that's where a lot of the money goes into making sure that every community has access to radio in their own language. And the same goes for television. But it's not just the national radio. There are 4 national radio channels and in German at least 2 national television channels, publicly funded. There's also a lot of local radio. So for instance, in Bern, where I live, we have local television, local radio that also receives money from the license fee, from public funding, to make sure that local radio exists as well as national radio. So although the referendum specifically is targeting national radio and national television with an attack on the license fee, it will affect local radio and television very much as well.
What is the extent, Diccon Bewes, of foreign broadcast signals? I mean, Switzerland is sort of surrounded by everybody else in those same languages. So what kind of situation are you facing there?
That's a great question because, of course, I live in the German-speaking part. I can listen to German radio. I can listen to Austrian radio. Of course, I can listen to English radio as well from Britain. But the fact that Switzerland's main languages are shared with all 5 of its neighbours means that there is a lot of competition. And that competition comes from foreign countries where there's no Swiss involvement. So one of the rather spurious arguments from the people who want to get rid of the license fee is that, oh, well, we can listen to German radio or French radio, which is fine if I want to listen to German radio. But German radio very rarely has Swiss news, let alone local Swiss news. And so it is a threat that a lot of people do watch German television, do watch French television, listen to French radio, because, of course, they have larger budgets and they can do more. But there is very little Swiss-related content to that. And I think that's one of the strongest arguments in favor of keeping the license fee, is that people will get their own news in their own language.
What would be lost if the vote went against Swiss radio? I mean, again, you're talking about the fact that, you know, there are other languages that can broadcast into the country. But in terms of culture, for example?
Well, I think there's two things, really important things that would be lost. One is culture, in that Switzerland isn't Germany, and very clearly isn't Germany. It might speak a German dialect, and the French part speak French, and the Italian-speaking part speak Italian. But it is Switzerland, and it's been Switzerland since 1291, far longer than Germany, Italy, or France have been around. And so you would lose a direct contact to Swiss culture, to Swiss traditions. I think more importantly, given the nature of politics in Switzerland, where things are decided by the people in a referendum every 4 months, you would lose that direct contact to Swiss politics and Swiss political debates. If we were to rely purely on German or French or Italian radio to inform us on what is coming up in the next referendum, then we would be very ill-informed. And so I think it's imperative for the democratic health of the nation and for political health that Swiss radio and television continue as they are, so that we get unbiased, balanced reporting on whatever that we are voting on next.
Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, public radio or some cases, I suppose, state radio, but certainly public radio is under some degree of threat in many countries around the world, or at least being seriously questioned. Are there wider implications, do you think, internationally from this vote in Switzerland?
Oh, I think that's hard to say. I think certainly in countries which have a license fee, which is Britain, for example, which funds all public radio and public television, I think if this vote were to go through, then it would have implications for the funding of the BBC, which obviously does far more than just BBC radio television. There's the BBC World Service as well, which millions of people listen to around the world and rely on for unbiased news. And I think Switzerland very often sets an example of how a democracy can function, and how part of that functioning is an independent media that isn't privatized, that isn't beholden to advertisers or to some billionaire owner. And I think if that were to disappear in Switzerland, it would set a very bad example to other countries, especially countries without such a good functioning democracy as Switzerland. And I think that would be a bad sign that independent, balanced media should continue in these countries.
Now, what are the chances, do you think, of which way is the sense that this vote might go? Is there any indication of that?
Yes, there's always lots of polls, and depending on whether you trust polls or not is depending on whether you trust the way it's going. As always, with almost every referendum campaign, I've now been here for 12 years, so that's quite a lot of referendums. The people who propose the referendum very often get the early lead because they're the ones making all the noise. They're the ones shouting about it. So at the moment, the latest poll is 57% will say yes to abolishing the license, and so therefore getting rid of public radio and television.
And when might this...
The vote is until 4th of March next year, so there's still 2 and a bit months for the other side to catch up. But at the moment, it is very much the case that public radio is in danger.
Diccon Bewes, thank you very much for this.
You're welcome.